Today is Thursday, October 21st, 2021, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Ali Chehade from Beirut in Lebanon. I first listened to him on Silver Bullion TV a few days ago or late last week about what's going on in Lebanon and in Beirut with the hyperinflation there. And I thought it would be interesting to contact him to talk about Lebanon, Beirut. He said a few things that made me think about not just the UK, but the whole of Europe, the US, that we're going down the same road, even though some people know very little about Lebanon and Beirut. And I couldn't think of anyone better to talk about it than Ali. And Ali, thank you for accepting my invitation. And how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm pretty sure there are way better people out there, but I really would love people to know about what's going in Lebanon, especially that I've been getting a lot of feedback from people who think that this is very insightful to things that they're passing through. So I'm here to share what I'm observing.
Can you tell the viewers a little bit about your background and where they can follow your work?
Thank you for this opportunity. First, I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity. My background is in media production and media management. I do also have I've studied and I also practiced entrepreneurship. That's how I get my, economic finance interests and passions. I do have a YouTube channel, which is on the side. It's not nothing major, but it's a place where I share some of my ideas. It's currently called Lebanon Inflation. If you want to know more about the day-to-day life, I like to share videos of how day-to-day life is impacted, and some also many small documentaries about what's going on. And if you want a tour of Lebanon, I actually have real-time car tours that you can drive around the city with me. And I'm generally passionate about humans, society, where society is going. And that's why I'm someone right now talking about economy, although it's not something that I've professionally studied or been trained on. I'm excited and passionate about the human experience.
Yes, and you said that a lot of people have an idea of Lebanon when they go there. They think it's an exotic place. But I was telling you before we started that I was looking through Google Maps and going through some places in Beirut, like I think it's called Wigan Street or Foch Street, which is actually there's an Avenue Foch in Paris, for example. And many people don't realize that the French were colonizing Lebanon until 1943, right. And they liberated the Free French liberated Lebanon. And walking, I didn't walk. I mean, virtually walking through those streets. I thought I might be in Mayfair or Knightsbridge in London. You've got Louis Vuitton stores, Fendi stores, Panerai. It doesn't look like a country that should be going through hyperinflation. And that's why I wanted to speak to you, because I am concerned that we're going down the same way of Lebanon and Beirut here in the UK and also in Europe. And the main reason for that is because I think we've been hijacked by the banking cartel, the central bankers, the financiers, and they've become such an important part of the economy in the UK. And having done a little bit of research about Lebanon in the last few days, it looks like the banking system in Lebanon was very free, very open. Your currency has always been exchangeable into foreign currency. And this started like in the 50s and 60s. And I've listened to a French commentator, and his theory is that in 1975, and I think that's when the civil war started in Lebanon, and that civil war lasted till 1990. 1975 is also pretty much around the time that the petrodollar came about. And prior to that, what he said is that most of the money in the Middle East, all the gold, all the bullion was flowing through Beirut. So maybe you might want to take over now and tell me if I've got anything wrong and what you think.
You got really pretty general picture. Beirut at one point was the economic hub of the Middle East, because what around Beirut, around Lebanon in general, were poor states in general, generally speaking, states that have had their own share of wars. Lebanon was the most liberal. We had the biggest entertainment economy in the Middle East amidst a lot of conservative cultures. Lebanon was the entertainment and the economic hub of the Middle East. And as you said, it just started, winding down from the moment the civil war started. And today, it's something that's interesting is that you reminded me when I have friends visiting from abroad or tourists, when I meet tourists here, one of the first questions I hear, especially if I'm driving them around, they always note that you have a lot of banks. This is not something that you would notice unless it's really a lot, right? I mean, I've heard that from at least 3 or 4 different people who are wondering when walking around our streets, why do we have a lot of banks? And that's true. Banks in Lebanon are like Starbucks in the States. There is one on every corner. And I mean, today, when I look back at what happened, it kind of may make sense. It seemed to be such a lucrative business in itself that got us here.
Yeah, and I mean, there's an old saying, because Switzerland is also a very small country. The population in Switzerland is a bit bigger than Lebanon. I think Switzerland's 8 or 10
and you
million.
know what's common between the Lebanese banking system and the Swiss banking system?
The secrecy, isn't it?
The secrecy. So, and I honestly do not see any legitimate use for banking secrecy other than the obvious. In Lebanon, banking secrecy is a big thing. Even branches across banks cannot pull out your information. So if I am going somewhere in Lebanon and I had to visit a branch of the bank that I work with, they have very limited access to what information they can pull up about me, although I'm their client. So it's definitely abused.
Yeah, are there a lot of also foreign banks in Beirut?
Not really. So there are a few foreign banks, but they function. They're very small banks. Some of them have only one branch. And the problem with the Lebanese banking system is that it forces foreign banks to, I'm not a banker, I'm not an economist, and I'm not a financer. So I might not have the scientific terms, but so the Lebanese banking system forces foreign banks to move under its laws. Nothing can happen without the clearance of the central bank. So within this crisis, one of its faces is that the banks pretty much took our money hostage because it doesn't exist anymore. And one of the problems is that even foreign banks who had accounts in foreign banks in Lebanon could not do anything with their money because those banks function like local banks. They're merely sort of a middle way between you and the global bank. We had Citibank, we had HSBC, both of those closed down a few years ago. HSBC, I believe, closed down around 4 or 5 years ago. So that was quite a while before the collapse. We still had some Arab banks that We still have some Arab banks that operate in Lebanon as Lebanese branches. A few of them are already closing down their 1 or 2 branches because it has become probably more expensive to run those banks than what they're making.
Yeah. So now people might be wondering, how did this
that's
crisis?
The funny part.
Yeah, how the crisis started, and you spoke about that on Silver Bullion TV. And one thing that I didn't realize that was very interesting is that prior to it was September 2019, the Lebanese pound was very stable. It was kind of pegged to the dollar, and you could use both
the dollar.
You could use both currencies interchangeably in Lebanon. But the reason I brought up this page is because this is really fake news here, that $1 only gets you 1,523.9 Lebanese pounds or lira. I guess you call it a pound or lira. Is it?
Lira or pound, exactly.
Yeah, but from what I've heard from you is that we're now already at 22,000. So
exactly.
how can you?
Take us
through the crisis when it started out, and how it was difficult at the time for everyone to imagine what would be happening today, and maybe talk about this fake exchange rate that we're seeing here.
So this fake exchange rate is what the dollar used to be equivalent to in Lebanese pounds as of the 4th quarter of 2019. And since then, the real value of the dollar has dropped to, as you said, right now it's hovering around 20,000 liras.
So the dollar's gone up, the dollar's gone up and the lira's dropped.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and you're talking about a 12, 13 times. And one of the schemes that the government and the banking sector are pulling is the official rate scheme. The country still counts the dollar at 1,500 liras. Although you cannot technically do that, this allows them to perform a lot of transactions, especially transactions that would liquidate your old dollars at the bank with Lebanese liras. So one of the things that they're trying to do is they're trying to just dissipate the money that we gave them and that they're no longer able to pay us back with liras, by printing liras, and by only, if you want, claiming that the value is 1,500 within the system. Yeah, that's far from being the one fake value. Right now in Lebanon, there is at least 6 official values for the dollar to the lira. And a bunch of those values are actually set by the government. So one of them, I mean, so if it sounds complicated, because it is, and they're trying to pull off all kinds of schemes to maximize their profits and minimize their losses. One of the values is also adopted by the banks, which is 3,900. And this is the money, this is your dollars if they went into the bank after October 17, 2019. So if you had dollars put into your account after that date, you can actually pull them out as Lebanese liras, but instead of 1,500, it's at 3,900. And then you have
in the black market, like as you can see.
That's not even the black market. That's the government.
Yeah, so they're basically, you know, it happens as well, for example, here in the UK and in New York and in the more advanced economies. What we're getting is they manipulate the price of gold and silver, physical gold and silver, so that they can really steal from you, because gold and silver should be worth a lot more than they are.
Exactly. And one thing to note for the people who are not used to a double currency system. As you said at the beginning, we use both currencies interchangeably. In regular days, I could go to the bank. Most people would have both a dollar and a lira account. I could withdraw my dollars, they give me dollars. I mean, life worked fine. All ATMs in Lebanon until one point have dollars and liras. So if you are a tourist in Lebanon, you can pull out dollars. All ATMs have that. As a matter of fact, whenever you try to perform any transaction on an ATM in Lebanon, it will ask you dollars or liras. That's how integrated the dollar was to our economy. And that is part of why the problem today is that big, because people are used to dealing with dollars. We can no longer do that, especially in day-to-day transactions, because the value is no longer agreed upon. And the government is creating multiple values within the umbrella of subsidies. So we have the fuel dollar, which was canceled just this week. The fuel dollar was priced at 10,000 liras and then pulled up to 12,000. We have the medical dollar. It really sounds like monopoly.
Well, I've got a couple of questions. We're going to go over the first one. Could you tell us like how your life and the life of normal Lebanese, average Lebanese has changed since it was September 17th that things started getting crazy?
October 17th,
because for all the years that you'd been in Lebanon until that date, that exchange rate was always the same. You could always exchange the dollar for the pounds, and all of a sudden things started changing. If you could go through that a little bit.
So, I mean, just like everything, this is quite complex. The way it's really hard to tell how an average Lebanese person's life changed. The only thing common, and I'll explain why, the only thing common is that life became more inconvenient. That's the one thing common. And the reason why it's really hard to generalize is that there are people in Lebanon who earn in dollars, and then there are people in Lebanon who get paid in liras. There are people who had cash savings in dollars. There are people who have liras. There are people who are richer today because their purchasing power increased dramatically, especially people that get paid their salaries in dollars. We also have Lebanon is one of the countries where there are more Lebanese outside the country than in the country. So we have a huge monthly influx of dollars from families and friends. So one thing that is surprising, even the Lebanese people amongst themselves, is that life, when you look at it, is really not as bad as you would think. And that's disappointing because there's a huge inflation and there's a gap that's being created because there are people who do not earn dollars. There are people who do not have families that send them dollars. And their money has lost more than 95% of its value. And that sector is truly, that demographic is truly the demographic that is taking it really hard. And one of the reasons, I mean, one of the analysis or the observations that you see, a lot of people ask, why aren't people protesting? Hey, look, I mean, we no longer have protests. The last protests happened 1.5 years ago. People are not on the streets. We're living life in a recession, but people are living their life. Part of it is the fact that a lot of people have dollars. They're definitely not the majority. They're definitely not the majority, but it's a considerable amount, an amount enough not to cause mass protests.
So you think that's, would you say that's like the top 10% of the population or top 20%?
People who earn in dollars, let's say people who earn in dollars would be probably the top 10 or 15% of the population. People who have access to savings in dollars, I would say are probably, that would be around another 15 or 20%. People who have access to friends who can send them dollars would be another 30, 35%. That's a big chunk. I would very roughly estimate people who have consistent access to dollars, let's say at least $300, $400 a month, to be at least 50 or 60% of the population.
So that has helped.
And when the national minimum wage, monthly minimum wage right now is around $30, you know, I mean, $200 now sounds like a lot.
Yeah, and what was the minimum wage in dollars prior to?
It was $450.
Yeah, $450. Yeah, so that's gone like 10 times less.
Exactly.
And
you know,
when you talk, when you talk about, sorry to interrupt, when you talk about like those who have access to dollars or earn in dollars, they remind me of.
I mean, I'm one of them. Let's be frank.
No, that's fine. But
so I'm
yeah.
happy to give that perspective.
It reminds me though of like what's going on now in the US, in the UK. You've got the people who work in the City of London or on Wall Street. They work for big corporations, the top 10%. They're doing well because they don't have like a it's not like we have the dollar and the dollar is doing well when the local currencies are going down, because but what it seems to be the parallel is that you've got the financial markets and the stock market and all the mergers and acquisitions. Those are doing well because the central bank is pumping all the money into the system. And my fear one day is that the central banks, the Fed, the Bank of England, the ECB, people are going to find out that they've been siphoning all this money to their friends, just like the Lebanese central bank has probably been doing. And you noted in your interview with Silver Bullion that Lebanon, the Lebanese taxpayer pumped $40 billion into the electricity system in the last 20 years.
That's not just taxpayers, that's loans.
That's and can you tell us what happened now? There was a blackout a couple of weeks ago.
We still have blackouts. So Lebanon, even in our good days, we did not have 24-hour electricity. We never had 24-hour electricity in Lebanon, including Beirut, the capital city. The whole electric system in Lebanon is a major siphoning scheme for the powers. But
for the powers
also,
that be, you mean for the elite, right?
And for the elite, for the people with power. So it is one of the sectors and one of the ministries. We have the Ministry of Energy, which is often fought over different political parties. It's one of the ministries that everyone wants because, I mean, why would someone fight over something if they don't have a lot of benefit out of that? And the way the whole system was built, it was very modular. It was always about just fixing the current problem. It was always short-term. Our biggest electricity investment in the last few years was actually paying Turkey to send power ships to Lebanon. So we basically spent billions in dollars to rent out a ship that produces energy simply, because that was the easy decision to take. That money could have
probably the most profitable for the powers that be as well. They probably got their cuts from the Turkish
And there are,
companies.
by the way, there are a lot of investigative reports about this specific issues where they break down the relationships between Turkey and Lebanon and the political and business elites that led to the power ship deals, because it is one of the biggest schemes happening in Lebanon, and the contract just expired a few days ago, and that's why we had a dip in power distribution, because we basically lost half of what Lebanon produces, which already was not enough in terms of power. We also, so other than the fact that the infrastructure is not well built, we do not have enough, like even if we had the money needed to buy the fuel, which is the other problem, we do not have enough production capacity, because we over the years, we have not built enough power plants. So the other part is the fuel. And you know, the way the fuel comes into Lebanon is through the government. And when the government is not being able to agree on a price for a dollar, and as you know, when we import fuel, we pay in dollars. No one's going to take the Lebanese liras. And when you want to pay in dollars, you need those dollars to be with you. And that was one of the problems, that the government was not able to actually just purchase the fuels. Basically, I mean, not to get too technical, but it is fuel companies bringing fuel, and it has to happen through the government. Gas, petrol for your car, diesel, the prices are all set by the government, so it's not a free market. We have weekly price changes, and only yesterday the government removed all the subsidies of the fuel, and now it's 10 times more expensive to, well, not even 10 times, I would say at least 15 times more expensive to fill up your car. Very expensive, and that fueled into the electricity problem, because we also, most of our electricity is actually not provided by the government right now. It's provided by private generator providers, and they are unable to acquire enough fuel. So although it's more expensive, so it's one of those things where even having the money is not solving the problem. That's when it really gets icky. Because
when you
even
have
people
the money,
with money are not able to solve their problems.
So what would you say is the biggest, what's the Lebanese economy based on the last 20 years? Is it trade and finance, would you say? Is that the strength of it?
If by the Lebanese economy, you mean money produced or pumped into Lebanon, a big part of it is the finance sector. And the other part of it is expat transfer. Believe it or not, we do have an economy that one of its basis is expats. Yeah. It's at least 20% of the GDP of families sending money into Lebanon.
Yeah, because I'm trying to because my viewers, a lot of them are in the US, but I'm in the UK. And I'm not doing this video just to try to show people what's happening in Lebanon, but I think it's to draw parallels with what's happening. Mm-hmm. For example, here in the UK, the NHS, the National Health System, has been under pressure because of the health crisis, but it had been under pressure for the last 10 years. And I was just checking before we came on that their budget, annual budget is 100 billion, more than 100 billion pounds. And that's not Lebanese pounds. That's like $150 billion a year. And now for the last 2 years almost, I can't have, I haven't been able to see my doctor. They're saying that they're, under threat again, the NHS. That
doesn't make sense, right?
And I kind of and people here in the UK, they don't use the word corruption too much. They say, okay, oh, it's waste. Money's been wasted in the NHS, but I think it's more than just waste. What's your opinion?
I mean, waste,
100 billion is flowing.
Waste assumes no ill intentions. Corruption assumes ill intentions.
So I think it could be a bit of, I would say it's a bit of both. And
I mean, waste is just bad management.
Yeah, and how can you have such bad management that 100 billion pounds plus?
That's a lot.
It's not fixing things. Yeah. The other thing that I would say, because I worked in finance for 20 years, and I was around when the great financial crisis took place in 2008. And not only in the US, but in the UK and Europe, the taxpayer had to bail out all the big banks. I think all the central banks, the major central banks since 2008, they've printed about $26 trillion out of thin air to keep the bankers going. So you would think that if they've pumped so much funny money, even though it's funny money, it should be helping our economies, and it doesn't.
Not really.
So I think Lebanon is like a canary in the coal mine. It's a microcosm of what's happening in the Western world. And one day we're going to wake up, and unfortunately, I think it's going to be like you did on 17th of September, I think 2019, and you're going to realize that your currency was actually something that was not real. And I think it's going to happen in the US, UK, and Europe. But the only we're not going to be able to resort to the dollar, unfortunately, because the dollar is going to go the way of the Lebanese lira, I think. So,
I mean, in these times, there's one. I'm using this as a learning experience, and it's one of those things where you cannot. There's no right answer. You cannot tell people what to do or what not to do, and that cannot be one thing. You can definitely, think of best practices. You can think of red flags not to ignore, and you learn how to minimize. So one of my beliefs is that during crisis, you should not be trying to minimize profits. You should be trying to, you shouldn't be trying to maximize profits. You should be trying to minimize losses. And that's how I perceive it. One important thing that will help people, and that's a mistake that I made, is just in finance and investment, people talk about diversification, but it's not something that we talk about when it comes to personal finances. I say we need to start thinking of diversification, even when it comes to your personal finances, to the places where you store your wealth. Because money essentially serves two purposes. One, which is facilitating everyday transactions, and the second, which is storing your wealth and value. So with the hyperinflation, both are just shattered. And the more ways you have, the more plans you have set, the less impact either would have. So you would still, if you had some part of your wealth in dollars or in property, but for example, in property in Lebanon wouldn't have been a solution because no one has money to pay for your properties. So you really need, and that's why it's important to diversify. Some people feel safe that they have properties, but when there's an economic recession, good luck finding someone liquidating your. That's why someone
that can pay your rent, the rent that they owe you.
Exactly, well. People are leaving, and then if your only other asset compared to fiat money is a property, and you needed money and you couldn't liquidate it, you would start lowering your price. And eventually you might sell at a loss, and that's what causes markets to go down when there's not enough money to be paid and people want to pay. And that's what happened in Lebanon. A lot of people lost their monies at the bank, so their savings are gone. And the only way they could liquidate, they need money. The only way they could create money out of thin air is sell properties. And because all people's money are at the bank, there's no one to buy your property, and prices just crashed. People were selling just because they really need the money.
When did you realize, because I think in the interview with Silver Bullion, you said that when it started in September 2019. In hindsight, you can
October.
see yeah, but he said in hindsight you couldn't see that it was really kicking off. So it took you about a month. It took you about a month to realize that, right? And what about like people who are not as perceptive as you? Did they take longer to realize what was really going on?
There are people until today, more than 2 years in, who look at this naively, who still think that this is a small dip, who still get excited when they elect a new government, as if we've never had governments before. You know, some people still refuse to accept what's going on. And part of the problem, the reason it came as a shock, and see, I'm not into conspiracies. I'm not that type of person. I'm not into like all those crazy theories, but people, there's no reason for you to trust your government blindly. Our government, I mean, it was something that I was naively, you know, accepting, because our government, our central bank governor, even 1 week before when the dollar started collapsing, the lira started crashing. There are literal statements, you can look them up on YouTube right now, of them saying our economy is great, the lira is fine, it's stable. There are literal statements of the governor of the central bank saying your monies are safe at the bank, and that was even before things started shaking. And I refuse to believe that they didn't know it. I refuse to believe that this is something that happens overnight. They were blatantly lying. And it's a government in Lebanon. Lebanon, I mean, compared to the general Middle East, is considered to be quite liberal, quite relatively democratic, despite all the corruption. But still, we were scammed. You know, a lot of people described what happened as the biggest Ponzi scheme in modern history.
So it looks like your central bank governor, Mr. Riyad Salameh, he made all those statements, and he's still the governor or president of the central bank, which is quite amazing, I find.
Exactly, it shows you.
And he's been there almost for 30 years.
He has been, and it shows you how the ruling class and the business class are just intertwined. The government, and that's, I mean, I just learned a new term the other day, which is cronyism.
Cronyism, yeah.
Cronyism, which is, you know, the intertwine between governments and businesses. And that could possibly be the most evil thing on earth.
Yeah.
Because you know, they pull each other, and when they're intertwined, there's, you know, you usually go. So I mean, how do you usually solve your problems? If you have a problem with the business, you go and complain to the government. If you have problem with government services, you go to businesses to solve these problems. But when those two things are like woven into the same fabric, there's no way out of this. They create the system that helps them smuggle the most money.
Yeah, that's why I'm always for the smallest government as possible. The government should be administering the rule of law, protecting private property. They shouldn't be in bed, you know, with private companies. And like the other day here in London on Monday night, we had our Prime Minister Boris Johnson hosting a dinner, and he had Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan, he had Schwartzman from Blackstone, he had Solomon from Goldman Sachs. So he had all these bankers. What were they talking about? You know, and that's not good. And I see that your central bank governor, and this just goes to show, hopefully, the public out there in the rest of the world, not to trust not just your government blindly, but also not to trust the IMF, the Arab Money Funds, the international, and the World Bank. because according to this, he's still a member of the board of governors at the IMF.
Oh yeah, he's fine.
And you told me that this guy was caught carrying $80,000 in a suitcase a few weeks ago, and he's under investigation by the Swiss banking authorities and the French banking authorities. And despite that, the IMF is still sees him as a respectable person.
Exactly.
It doesn't surprise me though, because you probably heard of the president of the ECB, Christine Lagarde. She's a French lady. She was the head of the IMF up until a few years ago, Christine Lagarde. And she was convicted in France because she was finance minister, I think, in France once. And she was given a 1-year criminal prison sentence in France by like a special government court. But nothing happened to her. She stayed as head of the IMF, and now she's the head of the biggest, one of the biggest central banks in the world, the ECB.
And I mean, one of the problems, especially in Lebanon, is that a lot of people ask me like, okay, so now you have a new government, which is around 1 month old. Hopefully things will change. So not really. Lebanon has what's called a ruling class. No matter how many governments change, even if Riyad Salameh gets changed, you shouldn't expect any change, because what's being changed is the pace. Lebanon is built, everything in Lebanon is built, including our politics, on negotiation and agreements. Our president is not elected, he's selected by a group of people. Our government, members of government, the reason we did not have a government for the last 14 months until last month is because they were literally fighting like kids over who gets which cabinet. I mean, and there's the big ones, the finance ministry, and then there's the justice ministry, you have the power ministry, and those ones are always fighting. And the only way out of this is getting those people on a table so they can agree. So you can only imagine how long it takes for these people to agree on things and on names. And you see how slow and bureaucratic that is. So even if Riyad Salameh is changed one day, some people might get excited, some people might get scared. I won't either.
Yeah, I mean,
it just doesn't matter.
It's the same thing here now. It doesn't really matter if it's a Labor government or a conservative government, or even in the US, if it's left or right, you have
like a cancer that's like an organism in itself.
Yeah. And it's not just in Lebanon. People need to wake up here in the UK as well. Boris Johnson was supposed to be a libertarian, a free market advocate, but everything he's doing is like the complete opposite. We're going into this cronyism more and more. And I think people need to wake up that this it's not just something that happens maybe in Venezuela or Zimbabwe or Lebanon. No, I think it could happen here.
It just happens quicker. It just happens quicker because there are some catalysts. But as you're saying, everyone could potentially get there.
Yeah. And what do you think is going to happen to the Lebanese lira? Do you think it's going to go even, excuse me, further down? And then what do you think is going to be the solution, if there's going to be one,
So again, as not an expert, so I'm just someone who likes to read, watch, analyze. Just today we had the Minister of Economy. Again, those are the real fake news. Just spread what we call anesthetic shots to get people to calm down. He said the dollar to the lira will eventually settle at 12,000 liras. And compared to what it is right now in the real market, which could also be referred to as the black market, it's hovering around 20,000. So that is sort of positive to people. But in reality, there's nothing getting fixed. In reality, they're already speaking about printing new denominations of paper money that are bigger than what we needed before. So the biggest denomination we had was the 100,000 liras, which was worth around $70. Right now, there are talks about printing 500,000 and a million. And the million right now is barely $50. So the bank is claiming that they will be pulling out enough liquidity from the market through old expired currencies, and they will be doing it the proper way. But to them, they say, oh, we're just technically making your life easier. Don't worry, we're doing it correctly. But honestly, I have no reason to believe that. Like, I have no reason to believe what they're doing, what they're printing. I do believe there are also talks about minimum wages, including multiplying the minimum wage by 6 or 7. So that alone would cause massive inflation. And both of those happening, and both of those in the pipeline of the government is not really a good thing, because for that to work, you also need other economic reforms. We are still not productive. The only thing that Lebanon is relying on and waiting for right now is IMF money. And that would be like, you know, the leverage that we would have. But that's not sustainable. We are not doing any economic or financial reforms. We still have thousands upon thousands of government employees who do nothing. We have an office of railroads in Lebanon that has 10 employees, and we do not have trains. We had trains. We had like a train passing through Lebanon 50 years ago. We have not had that in 40 years. And we still have like a governmental office called the Office of Trains and Railways with like 10 to 15 employees. I don't know what they do. They make they earn, and that's just one example. So I mean, the economy is not getting any better.
Yeah,
and that would be the only thing that would improve the lira, the value of the lira.
Yeah. So what it seems to me, like you said, it was the greatest Ponzi scheme. I mean, looking at how it's structured, Lebanon, it looks like your elite, the banking elite that run Lebanon, they just basically sucked all the hard currency out of your country.
Some people used to take loans from foreign banks and put their money in Lebanese banks, because at one point the interest in a Lebanese bank was 15%. And that's the interest that's accessible to the public. You're not talking about deals. People would literally go to neighboring countries, get loans, and put them in a Lebanese bank because it would make them money.
What's your major message for people who live in Europe and in the US who might think this could never happen in their countries?
You know, I'm going to say something a little bit different. So I'm not going to say the usual, which is expected to happen. Well, I'm already saying them. Protect yourself financially, diversify, do not spend more than you need. You know, in crises, you really need to live at bare minimum, because you never know when you would need the bulk of your money. But one thing I would say is a little bit less on the financial side, but more on the human side. And it's something that I have not said before in my other interviews, which is one of the saddest things that I passed through during this phase is seeing the Lebanese people cannibalize each other. I really advise you to think about the value of your relationships, the value of the people around you, the value of your community as a community. And if it happens one day, people will be fighting over things. We literally have fist fights at supermarkets, at gas stations. And we've had a lot of black markets. People would go line on gas stations, and they would create big lines just to later on sell the gas to people who need it for 5 times the price. And they think that's good business. That's not business.
No.
There's a difference between a good business. A good business would probably give you a delivery service, would probably take your car and valet it so you don't have to wait. A good business will not abuse your needs, would not increase the price based on how badly you need it. That's abuse. That's not business. And that would really be my biggest advice, because that was the thing that made me the most sad. And that's the thing that makes it much harder to solve the problem. Because as long as people are trying to abuse each other, and allow me to say, some people are happy with what's happening. People who earn dollars do not want the lira to get better, because so the difference between this and the first example you gave about New York and how there's a different class is that in this scenario, one class gains when the other class loses. And that's a dynamic that you do not want to get to, because that would get people to kill each other. Because not only I'm gaining dollars, but I would only gain $1 if you lose this much. And it's really sad to see people wishing for the lira to keep dropping, or vice versa, or whatever, because they're trying to make the most out of it, because it's benefiting them, because they're living a lifestyle that they couldn't before. And the reason that happened is that the currency inflation does not move at the same pace as the market inflation. So the currency inflation could be so quick, really high. Businesses do not adapt as quickly, because there are a lot of different considerations when you're a business. So market inflation is much, much slower than currency inflation, and people are able to live lavish lifestyles that they could never even dream about before. And I'm okay with that. I'm not okay with people enjoying that while seeing the other fellow citizens suffer. They can't send their children to schools. They cannot buy food for their families. A lot of students did not go to school this year. A lot of students, for the simple fact that the bus, the bus that takes students to school is more expensive than the tuition itself. And for the simple fact that parents cannot literally afford or are not able to take their children to school, or not pay the tuition. A lot of people are not getting the enough hospitalization, or the correct hospitalization, if at all. And it saddens me to see that people who are benefiting from the inflation or the hyperinflation don't care. They don't care that you really need this. They don't care that you might die if you don't get this medicine. We have seen the government has busted, so this is all a play, the government has busted storage facilities full of out-of-stock medications. Hundreds of containers of out-of-stock medications for cancer, for diabetes. They were all stored to be sold later on at a more expensive price. You would go to the pharmacy, and the pharmacist would say, we don't have it. And it's not the pharmacist's fault. They're just a distributor. The actual importers that are backed by the government are importing these things and just storing them to sell them later at more expensive prices. This is cannibalism. This is the closest you can get to cannibalism.
Yeah, maybe it's also because the government is so intertwined with the bankers that they know that the currency is going to go, so they might as well hold on. And I'm not saying it's right; they
Exactly.
might as well hold on to those goods. But
And that's one of the problems of inflation. Because you know that the currency is going up, so you know it for a fact.
Yeah,
and you can decide: do I sell this today or tomorrow? And you know what? When it's a computer mouse, when it's a camera, that's okay. But when you're trading with people's essentials, that's
and I think unfortunately that's starting to happen in the West. We're seeing the energy crisis here. You mentioned people having fist fights in Lebanon,
having gunfights. We've had people die on petrol stations.
We've had fist fights here in the petrol stations a few weeks ago. So yeah, it happens very easily. Great. Thank you very much, Ali. And maybe we will talk again in the future. Take care.
Hopefully in better times.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.